No mate yet, her ex mocked. He didn't know she'd married the most powerful alpha in the kingdom. Mist curled around the lamp posts and drifted between the wooden market stalls, softening the colors of woven fabrics and fresh fruit. Ilara walked slowly, her boots tapping quietly against the wet stones, her dark cloak drawn tightly around her shoulders. She kept her eyes lowered, though her mind was restless. It had been years since she had left this town behind, leaving behind whispers, half-true stories, and one person who had mattered more than anyone else, Rowan. Once he had been her companion, her confidant, the boy who made her laugh with careless jokes and warm smiles. Now he was nothing more than a shadow of the past, yet one that still gnawed at her heart. No mate yet, the voice cut through the morning air like a knife. Ilara's heart lurched. She turned slowly and found him standing there, leaning against the post of a bakery, smirk curling across his face. Rowan. Older but still sharp-featured, still arrogant in the way that made her stomach twist. He had a way of speaking that made the world seem smaller, and yet somehow, at that moment, the entire square felt tight, as if it were closing around them. "You," she began, her voice careful, measured, but he interrupted her. "Still alone, Ilara." After all this time, his laugh was light, but cruel, as if her life were a joke meant only to amuse him. "I always thought someone as clever as you would have found someone by now." Ilara's fingers tightened on the strap of her satchel. She wanted to say something sharp, something that would cut him down, but she stopped herself. Words were unnecessary. He did not know. He could not know because she was no longer alone. Her husband, Kale, was a name whispered in fear and awe across the kingdom. The Alpha. The one who commanded loyalty not just with authority, but with a presence so powerful it made the air itself seem alive. No one dared oppose him, and few had ever seen his eyes without trembling. And yet, Kale had chosen her, Ilara. Her heart quickened at the thought, a warmth blooming in her chest amidst the chill of the morning. Rowan's grin widened and he stepped closer, clearly expecting her to be flustered. "What's the matter?" No answer. "Afraid I'll remind you that time is running out." Ilara's lips curved into a faint, unreadable smile. "I have no interest in your reminders," she said softly. Her voice carried just enough calm to make him pause, just enough to remind him that she was no longer the same girl he had once known. The square was beginning to fill with townspeople. Merchants arranged their goods, children ran through puddles, and a few nobles passed through, their cloaks brushing the cobblestones. Rowan noticed the movement and smirked, using the crowd to make his words sharper. "You always were too serious, Ilara," he said. "I wonder if you'll ever learn to enjoy life, or if you're destined to be alone forever." Ilara wanted to tell him the truth, to say that she had a husband so powerful that even the whispers of his name could stop a riot. To say that the man who had once been her friend now ruled the kingdom's shadows and she was his mate. But she did not. Words like that were dangerous, and Rowan thrived on danger. He would have mocked her more if he knew. Instead, she turned, her cloak flowing behind her like a shadow, and walked past him. She did not run, nor did she look back, but she felt his gaze burn into her, sharp and questioning. From the mist at the edge of the square, a figure watched. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that seemed to hold storms within them. Kale, the Alpha. His presence was like a mountain rising from the fog, silent, unwavering, terrifying. Ilara felt a strange mixture of fear and comfort. He did not move, did not speak, yet she knew he had been there all along, unseen but all-seeing. Rowan's laughter faltered as he glanced toward the edge of the square. "What whose?" he stammered, but before he could finish, Kale's gaze met his. That single look, deep and unyielding, froze Rowan in place. The smirk drained from his face, replaced by a sudden, uneasy awareness that he had stepped into a world far larger and darker than he had imagined. Ilara did not turn toward Kale, but she felt the steady power radiating from him. He had not moved, yet his presence alone had commanded attention. Rowan's eyes flicked nervously back to her, but the words he had prepared to wound her seemed small and foolish now. She continued walking, heart beating steadily, mind alive with tension. The square felt different now, charged, as if the air itself recognized that she was no longer the same Alara who had laughed at Rowan's jokes. She had walked through fire and shadow, through fear and danger to become someone stronger, someone Kale had chosen. By the time she reached the edge of town, the fog had begun to lift, revealing the distant hills and the dark forests that stretched toward the horizon. She paused at the river that marked the boundary of the town, watching the water twist and turn like a silver ribbon under the morning light. Here, she allowed herself a small breath, letting the tension of the encounter slip from her shoulders. And yet, even as she felt relief, a small part of her mind whispered warnings. Rowan's words had been careless, but he had never been careless about everything. There was cunning behind that smirk, and cunning could be dangerous. She knew the dangers of underestimating him, but she also knew that with Kale at her side, she was no longer helpless. The road to Kale's fortress was long and winding. Towering cliffs rose on one side, the forest pressing close on the other, shadows deep and full of secrets. Alara walked with purpose, feeling the weight of her cloak and the small pack on her back. She carried only essentials, a journal, a few supplies, and the token Kale had given her on the day they were wed, a small, carved piece of obsidian that pulsed faintly with power. As she walked, memories of Kale's touch, calm yet commanding, flooded her mind. He had taken her hand that first night in the fortress, eyes steady, voice low and soft. "You are mine," he had said, not as a threat but as a promise. That promise had settled over her heart like a warm cloak, comforting even as it carried the weight of responsibility. The path narrowed and the mist thickened again. Alara paused, sensing movement among the trees. She was not afraid. She knew how to move through shadows, how to listen for danger. But she could feel the subtle presence of magic in the air, something ancient and powerful brushing against her senses. She moved carefully, steps measured, hand brushing the hilt of the small dagger at her belt. And then she heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible rustling like a whisper through leaves. Her breath caught and she froze, listening. The forest was alive with sounds, birds calling, leaves shifting, branches creaking. But this was different. It was deliberate. Before she could decide whether to retreat or advance, a voice spoke. Low, smooth, and filled with amusement. "You do not walk alone, Alara," it said. She whirled, hand on her dagger, and there he stood, Kale, emerging from the mist as if he had stepped from the shadows themselves. His cloak flowed behind him like liquid night, and his eyes glimmered with a stormy intensity that made her heart skip a beat. I did not hear you," she said, though she was hardly surprised. His presence always had a way of appearing suddenly, as if he belonged to the shadows themselves. "You were not meant to be alone," Kale said, stepping closer, the power radiating from him almost tangible. "Even here in the mist, there are those who would seek to challenge you." Alara's pulse quickened. She wanted to feel afraid, but she felt only a strange, thrilling certainty. "Rowan," she whispered. Kale's eyes darkened and the air seemed to stiffen around them. "I know," he said simply. "He does not yet understand the consequences of his arrogance. But he will." The two of them stood in silence, the fog swirling at their feet, the distant forest pressing close like a living thing. The world seemed suspended, waiting. And in that moment, Alara understood fully what it meant to be bound to Kale, not just by marriage, but by something deeper, older, and stronger than words. And as the sun began to rise, faintly piercing the mist, Rowan's laughter echoed faintly from the town behind them, a reminder that the past was never far away, and that the shadows of old love and old rivalries were never truly gone. Alara tightened her cloak around her shoulders, glanced at Kale, and felt the weight of the future pressing on them both. Whatever came next, she knew they would face it together. And somewhere, deep in the mist, Rowan's eyes burned with curiosity, fear, and the faintest trace of regret. He did not yet know that Alara was no longer the girl he had mocked. She was far beyond that now. The journey to the fortress would be long, the dangers many, and the past was not yet done with them. But for the first time in years, Alara walked forward with certainty, not as a girl mocked for being alone, but as a mate to the most powerful alpha in the kingdom. Cliffhanger. As the mist parted briefly, Alara sensed another presence behind them, one darker, older, and far more dangerous than Rowan. A chill ran down her spine. Whatever waited in the shadows of the forest was awakening, and this was only the beginning. The road to Kale's fortress wound through jagged cliffs and dense forests that seemed almost alive with shadows. The mist clung stubbornly to the ground, curling around roots and rocks, hiding secrets and dangers alike. Alara walked with measured steps, feeling the weight of her cloak and the faint pulse of the obsidian token Kale had given her. Kale walked beside her, silent and imposing. His eyes scanned the path, sharp as a hawk's, catching every movement in the shadows. The presence he carried was undeniable. Even the trees seemed to bow slightly away from him, and the wind whispered past with a hush of awe. "You feel his power," Kale said suddenly, his voice low and steady, breaking the silence. "Even here it lingers in the forest. Not all that threatens you is human." Alara nodded. She had felt it. There was something restless in the forest, something watching, waiting, perhaps testing her. Yet for all her fear she felt a strange confidence walking with Kale. She knew that together they were not just strong, they were unstoppable. "I am ready," she said softly. Her voice carried no fear. She had faced the echoes of her past, she had seen Rowan's arrogance, and now she would face whatever else dared to challenge her. Kale glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Do not mistake readiness for immunity," he warned. "The world will test you, the kingdom will test you. Even I cannot shield you from everything, but I can prepare you." The fortress emerged from the mist like a shadow carved from stone. Jagged towers pierced the sky, their dark surfaces shimmering faintly with enchantments woven into the walls. A drawbridge, worn but sturdy, led over a deep chasm, and as they approached, two guards in black armor stepped forward, bowing their heads. "Alara," Kale said, gesturing toward the fortress. "Once you step inside, you are no longer the girl who walked the streets of the town. You are mine, and you are part of the Alpha's realm." Alara swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. It was not ownership in the cruel sense, but a bond older and stronger than most could understand. In this world, the Alpha's mate was not merely a spouse. She was a partner, a shield, and a force. And she would need every ounce of courage and wisdom to walk this path. As they crossed the drawbridge, the air seemed to thrum with energy. The fortress gates opened silently, revealing a courtyard where statues of legendary warriors and mystic beasts stood in eternal vigil. The walls were etched with symbols that glowed faintly, telling stories of past rulers, of battles won and lost, and of powers that had shaped the kingdom for centuries. Alara's eyes lingered on a statue of a woman holding a sword high above her head. The inscription read, "Strength is born not of fear but of choice." She felt a spark of determination. If the Alpha had chosen her, then she would not falter. She would meet every challenge, every shadow, every threat with courage. Kale led her through the halls, their steps echoing against stone. Torches lined the walls, their flames flickering like trapped souls. Servants bowed as they passed, their eyes a mixture of fear, respect, and curiosity. No one questioned Kale's authority. Few had ever dared. And none questioned him with Alara by his side. They entered a large chamber, walls lined with books, weapons, and artifacts collected over centuries. A hearth burned in the center, casting a warm glow that seemed almost alive. Kale gestured toward a chair. "Sit," he commanded gently. "There is much to discuss." Alara took a seat, feeling the heat from the fire on her face. She looked around, noticing the meticulous order of the room. Every weapon, every artifact, every book seemed to have its place, as if the chamber itself was a living extension of Kale's mind. "Rowan," Kale began, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Do you know why he mocked you?" Alara frowned. "Because he is arrogant and cruel. Because he believes I should remain what I was." Kale's eyes narrowed. "Arrogance is one thing, but there is something else. A plan. He seeks influence in the kingdom. Your presence challenges him, and he will not accept it. You must understand this. Not all who smile at you are allies. Not all who bow are loyal." Alara's heart raced, but she did not waver. "I understand, but I am not powerless." Kale allowed a faint smile to touch his lips. "Good. You are clever, yes. But cleverness alone cannot survive the shadows that linger in this kingdom. You will need more." From a hidden alcove, Kale retrieved a small leather-bound book, its pages filled with notes, diagrams, and spells. "This will help," he said. "You are not just my mate. You are a part of this kingdom now. Knowledge is your first weapon." Alara took the book carefully, feeling the weight of centuries of wisdom in her hands. She opened it, glancing at the sketches of protective wards, strategies for defense, and notes about allies and enemies. She realized that Rowan's mockery was only a small threat compared to the dangers that now surrounded her. "Will he come for me?" she asked quietly, not looking up. Kale's gaze was steady, unwavering. "He will try, and he will fail, but you must be ready to act even without me. I cannot be everywhere at once, and some shadows must be faced alone." Alara nodded, determination settling into her bones. She had grown stronger than she had realized. She had faced fear and loneliness, and now she would face this kingdom, its politics, its enemies, and its darkness, with Kale's guidance and her own courage. Days passed in the fortress, each one teaching her new lessons. She learned the ways of the Alpha's court, the subtle dances of loyalty and betrayal, and the hidden codes that ruled not just behavior but survival. Kale was patient but firm, guiding her, testing her, challenging her. There were moments of quiet intimacy, small gestures that spoke louder than words. A hand resting on hers while studying the map of the kingdom. A brush of his cloak as he passed by. A glance that held understanding, trust, and unspoken promises. Each moment deepened the bond between them, weaving strength, affection, and respect into a connection neither had expected but both cherished. But danger was never far. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned crimson, a messenger arrived, breathless and trembling. The seals he carried were broken, and his hands shook as he handed Kale a scroll. Kale's eyes darkened as he read. The scroll bore news that sent a chill through the room. Rowan had been appointed to the king's council, a position that gave him influence over key decisions in the kingdom. He could now challenge Alara and Kale not just socially, but politically. Alara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "He will not stop at mockery," she whispered. "No," Kale agreed. "And neither will I, but we will face this together. You must understand the law of the Alpha. Power is not given, it is taken, defended, and protected. You are part of that now. Every move you make will echo through the kingdom." Alara studied the scroll, her mind racing. Rowan's ambition was dangerous, but she had learned enough to see the cracks in his plans. He was clever, but pride blinded him. And pride, Kale had taught her, was a weapon as well as a weakness. As night fell, the fortress seemed to come alive. Shadows shifted unnaturally, whispering secrets to those who could hear. Alara felt the hum of magic beneath the stones, the pulse of power that thrummed in every wall, every torch, every artifact. She understood, finally, why Kale's presence had always been so commanding. It was not just authority, it was connection to the kingdom itself, to the very soul of the land. Kale approached her as she studied the scroll again. "The council is the beginning," he said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "What comes next is far greater. And far more dangerous." Alara looked up at him, meeting his stormy gaze. "I will not fail," she said. Kale's eyes softened slightly, but the edge of steel remained. You may not fail, but you will be tested. The kingdom does not forgive weakness, and neither do its enemies. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and carrying whispers of the forest beyond. Alara felt the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders, but she also felt something else: strength, courage, and a fierce determination to rise to the challenge. And then a sudden noise echoed through the halls, a soft, deliberate shuffle like footsteps moving against the grain of the stone. Kale stiffened, instantly alert. Alara's heart raced. "Someone is here," Kale said quietly, voice edged with steel, "and it is not a friend." Alara gripped the scroll, ready for whatever would come. She had faced Rowan's mockery, the shadows of her past, and the whispers of fear. She was ready to face the unknown. Cliffhanger, a dark figure appeared at the edge of the torchlight, tall, silent, and moving with unnatural grace. Alara's heart froze. Rowan could not have come alone. Something older, something more dangerous, had entered the fortress. And Kale's expression told her that this was only the beginning. Torches burned low along the stone walls, their light bending strangely, as if shadows leaned closer than they should. Alara stood near the tall window of her chamber, looking down at the dark forest far below the cliffs. The wind carried faint sounds, branches shifting, leaves whispering, something calling from deep within the land. She knew now that the presence Kale had sensed was real. It was not Rowan, it was older. Behind her, the door opened quietly. Kale entered without sound, his steps steady, his expression dark with thought. He had changed into armor made of black metal that shimmered faintly, marked with ancient symbols. Power clung to him like a second skin. "You should not stand alone tonight," he said. Alara turned. "I could say the same to you." For a moment, something unreadable crossed his face. Then he stepped closer. The fortress wards were touched, not broken, tested. Her heart tightened. "By who?" Kale shook his head slowly. "By something that knows this place, something that remembers older laws." Alara swallowed. Since arriving at the fortress, she had learned many things, about power, about politics, about the dangerous balance Kale maintained. But this was different. This threat did not belong to courts or councils. It belonged to legend. Kale reached into his cloak and placed something into her palm. It was a thin silver band, warm to the touch, etched with runes that pulsed softly. "A ward ring," he said. "It will shield your presence. Wear it always." She closed her fingers around it. "You think I am the target?" "I know you are," Kale replied. Alara met his gaze. "Because I am your mate." "Yes," he said, "and because you are becoming more than that." The words stayed with her as he left to secure the fortress. The next morning, the Alpha's court gathered in the Hall of Stone. Alara walked beside Kale, her steps steady though her heart raced. The hall was vast, supported by towering pillars carved with scenes of ancient victories and great losses. Nobles, commanders, scholars, and envoys stood in quiet lines, their eyes following her. Some bowed, some watched carefully, some hid their dislike poorly. She felt it now, the shift. She was no longer invisible, no longer dismissed. Power had a way of changing how others looked at you. Kale took his place on the raised platform. His presence silenced the hall without a word. "Speak," he commanded. A council member stepped forward. "Alpha, word has reached the capital. Rowan of House Viral has raised concerns about the legitimacy of your bond." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Alara remained still. Kale's voice was calm. "He questions what he cannot control." The council member hesitated. "He has requested a formal challenge, not of blade but of law, a trial of standing." Alara's breath caught. A trial of standing was dangerous. It questioned not strength but worth. It forced one to prove their right to power before witnesses and before the land itself. Kale's jaw tightened. "He seeks to weaken her." "Yes," the council member said carefully, "and others may follow." Silence fell. Then Kale turned to Alara. "All trials bind both challenger and challenged," he said. "If you accept you stand alone, I cannot interfere." Alara felt the weight of every eye in the hall. This was what Rowan wanted, not a fight, a public doubt. She thought of the girl she had once been quiet, unsure, mocked. She thought of the fortress, the lessons, the nights of whispered guidance. She lifted her chin. I accept. A sharp breath moved through the hall. Cale's eyes locked on hers, something fierce and proud burning beneath the calm. Then the trial will be held at dusk, he announced. By the old stone. The old stone stood beyond the fortress walls, half buried at the edge of the forest. It was ancient, cracked, and marked with symbols no one living fully understood. Legend said it judged truth, not words. Alara stood before it as the sky darkened. Rowan arrived with his supporters, dressed in fine robes, confidence sharp in his smile. So, he said lightly, you truly believe yourself worthy. Alara did not respond. Cale stood apart, watching, bound by law to silence. The trial began. Rowan spoke first, his voice smooth. He spoke of bloodlines, of tradition, of how Alara came from nothing. Of how she had no claim, no title, no proof of strength. She hides behind the alpha, Rowan said. She borrows his shadow. The old stone did not react. Then it was Alara's turn. She stepped forward slowly. I was not born powerful, she said. I was not protected. I was not chosen by chance. I walked through fear. I learned. I endured, and I stood when I could have broken. The ground trembled faintly. She placed her hand on the stone. I do not ask for power, she said. I carry responsibility. If the land rejects me, I will leave. Silence stretched. The stone glowed, soft, steady light spreading through its cracks. Rowan's smile faltered. The forest wind rose. The old stone pulsed once, then again. Acceptance. A deep sound echoed like a heartbeat beneath the earth. Alara staggered as energy surged through her, warm, grounding, ancient, not Cale's power, her own. Gasps filled the clearing. Rowan stepped back, his face pale. This is impossible. The stone darkened. The trial was over. Cale moved instantly, catching Alara as her knees weakened. His hands were steady, but his eyes burned. She is recognized, he said. By law, by land, by fate. Rowan said nothing as he turned and left, but Alara saw it then in his eyes, fear. That night Alara dreamed. She stood in a place of endless shadow. Roots of light ran beneath her feet. A voice spoke without sound. You are bound now. She woke with a gasp. The ring on her finger glowed faintly. Cale stood near the door, already awake. You felt it, he said. Yes. He stepped closer. The trial awakened something. The presence we sensed, it knows now. As if summoned by his words, the fortress shook. A horn sounded once, twice, an alarm. Cale turned sharply. The forest line. They ran. From the walls, Alara saw it, a ripple moving through the trees. Not an army, not a beast. A shadow shaped like memory. Something ancient had crossed the boundary, and it was coming for her. Cale drew his blade, power gathering like a storm. Alara, he said, voice steady but urgent, whatever happens next, you must trust yourself. The shadow rose higher, taking form. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. Cliffhanger. As the shadow spoke her name in a voice older than the kingdom, Alara realized the truth. The trial had not only proven her worth. It had awakened an ancient force that now claimed her as part of its design, and there would be no turning back. It was tall, shifting, made not of flesh but memory. The air around it bent and trembled, as if the land itself feared what had awakened. Soldiers lined the fortress walls, their weapons raised, yet none dared move forward. Alara stood beside Cale on the highest rampart. Her heart beat fast, but her hands were steady. The shadow spoke again, its voice deep and layered, as if many voices spoke as one. Chosen one, it said, you have touched the old stone, you have been seen. Alara felt the ground beneath her feet pulse in answer. The warmth she had felt during the trial returned, spreading through her chest and arms, calm and strong. Cale stepped forward slightly, his presence sharp and commanding. You cross into my land without right. The shadow turned its attention to him. Alpha, it said, you guard what you do not own. Cale's jaw tightened. Alara raised her hand. "Wait," she said quietly. Kale looked at her, conflict flickering in his eyes. "Alara, I must hear it," she said. "This is about me." The shadow shifted, drawing closer, stopping just beyond the wards. "You carry the mark of balance," it told her. "Not ruler, not servant, a bridge." Alara swallowed. "A bridge to what?" "To the old force," it replied. "To the land before crowns, before alphas, before kings." Silence fell heavy. Kale turned to her. "This is why the land accepted you," he said softly. "You are not bound only to me." "No," the shadow agreed. "She is bound to choice." The words echoed. Alara felt something break open inside her, not fear but understanding. All her life she had been pushed, judged, mocked, underestimated. Even now others tried to define her by title or bond. But this power did not demand control. It demanded truth. "What do you want?" she asked. The shadow lowered, becoming less monstrous, more human in shape. "The balance has been broken, power hoarded, fear ruling. You stand between old force and new order." Kale's voice was firm. "I protect this kingdom." "And you do," the shadow said, "but even you cannot hold all things forever." The wind rose. The fortress banners snapped sharply. Alara turned to Kale. "If I accept this bond, what happens to us?" Kale met her gaze. For once the alpha looked uncertain. "I do not know," he admitted. "But I know this: I will not cage you." Her chest tightened. She stepped forward past the wards. A gasp rose from the walls. Kale moved instantly but stopped himself. "Alara," he said, voice strained. She did not turn back. "Trust me." The ground glowed beneath her feet as she approached the shadow. "I will not rule through fear," she said, "and I will not destroy what exists. If balance is needed, then I will stand as it, not above, not below." The shadow studied her. Then slowly it bowed. The dark shape unraveled into light and root and wind, sinking into the land. The forest sighed. The threat was gone. Dawn broke gently over the kingdom. The fortress stood unharmed. The land felt lighter, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. Alara stood in the courtyard as the court gathered. Whispers followed her, not mocking now, but awed. Rowan stood among them, pale and silent. Kale stepped beside her, his presence steady. "She faced what none before her could," he said, "and she chose restraint over dominance." The council bowed. Rowan took a step forward, voice tight. "So what is she now?" Alara looked at him calmly. There was no anger left in her. "I am myself," she said. "That was always enough." The king's envoy spoke next. "The council recognizes her standing, equal, unchallenged." Rowan said nothing more. He left that same day, his ambition hollowed by truth. Later, Alara stood with Kale at the cliff's edge, watching the sun sink beyond the hills. The wind tugged at her cloak. "You could have taken more," Kale said quietly. "The land would have given it." She smiled faintly. "Power that demands too much always takes something back." He nodded. There was silence, comfortable, heavy with meaning. "Will you stay?" he asked finally. She turned to him. "Do you want me to stay?" His answer was immediate. "Yes, as my partner." "Not my shadow." She reached for his hand. "Then I stay." The bond between them shifted, not weaker but clearer, chosen, balanced. Below them the kingdom endured, not ruled by fear, but guarded by strength and guided by choice.